Hello! Hamaretwa, njĩtagwo Grace Kĩbũi, na gũkũ gwa channel ĩno twaragia ũhoro wa tũnyamũ tũnini twĩ muoyo tũtaũragwo mingi ciũmbe na thero iria cithondekaga ciĩga cia mĩĩrĩ itũ. Ngwĩciria andũ aingĩ moka gũkũ gwa channel ĩno nĩ mendaga kũmenya mwarimũ wao nũ. Kuoguo ũmũthĩ ndauga atĩ no mũhaka njũke na nyonekane na ngeithanie. Ndĩroka nĩ mwageithĩka ũmũthĩ. Kwa video ĩno ngwenda kwaria ũhoro wa maũndũ matatũ. Kĩa mbere ndĩrenda kwaria ũhoro wa kũrĩa channel ĩno yumĩte. Gĩa kerĩ ndĩrenda kwaria ũhoro wa kĩrĩa ndĩrutĩte gũkũ gwa channel ĩno. Na kĩndũ gĩa gatatũ ndĩrenda kwaria ũhoro wa kũrĩa ndĩreciria channel ĩno ĩrathiĩ. As you can tell, I am still learning how to speak the Gikuyu language well. So, in today's video we're gonna talk in English. But then hopefully, in the next few years, I will be able to develop my comfort and ability to speak in Gikuyu confidently on camera. But today, we will speak in English. Let's jump in. This conversation is going to be broken down into 10 reflections, and I have all of these reflections written down on note cards right here. And so what we're gonna do is go through these note cards one at a time to help me guide the conversation. Reflection number 1. So this reflection card has to do with where we started. So this channel started primarily because I wanted to speak to my grandparents in the Gikuyu language about the coronavirus. So as you remember, at the very start of the coronavirus, scientists were learning so much new information in such a short span of time. And so I remember wondering whether my grandparents had access to some of the information that was being discussed and that was being developed. For context, at the start of the COVID pandemic, I was a PhD student in cell and molecular biology. And so cells and molecules are of very, very great interest to me. And so, unsurprisingly, a new virus was of very much interest. And so as we were learning, I wanted to know, how were other people learning, and how are other people learning across access and language barriers? And so in my case, I thought about my grandparents who live in Kenya, in central Kenya, and who primarily speak the language of Gikuyu. Gikuyu is one of about 40 plus languages in Kenya, and I remember just wondering, to what extent is some of this information being dispersed? A quick search to help me understand this question revealed that there were some gaps in terms of the molecular details that people were discussing. And so then I decided that this would be a great growth opportunity for me to learn how to talk and describe basic biology in my mother tongue. And the aim of putting this on YouTube was, number one, to be able to distribute it easily to my family members, and then number two, to hopefully encourage other scientists who are interested in learning their mother tongue or who are interested in communicating their concepts in their mother tongue to do the same. If you look on the popular channel Rekeshime Nene in August of 2020, you will find a lesson about coronavirus, and that was me. The reason I pitched that organization is because I recognized that some of this information had wider reaching interest, perhaps. And I'm really, really grateful that they gave me the opportunity to speak on their platform to their audience. And the response was really encouraging. And if you actually look at the date that that video was published and the starting date of this channel, they are one and the same, because it is that process that encouraged me to keep growing in this direction. And so I'm really, really grateful that they gave me that opportunity, and I'm really grateful to be here today and to look at the way that I have grown and learned in the last few years.